Brandy, the runaway. Brandy, our very special child, was retarded, not stupid. She was a pleasure to be around and never caused any problems at home or in public. There was, however, one exception when she was around 10 years old. She never told us why, or what led her to run away from home. Merlene did not even know she was gone. She had let herself out the door, and into the concrete drainage ditch that meandered through the Nottingham neighborhood, and ended up several blocks away. The phone rang, Merlene answered, and a woman who Merlene did not know, asked, "Don't you have a little Downs girl?" Merlene: "Yes." The woman: "Well, I have a little girl here that might belong to you." I would have loved to see Merlene's face at that moment. It is funny now, but I doubt she thought it was so entertaining. Crested Butte Condo Surprise. For several years we constructed a group of friends that liked to ski. Annually we would travel to Crested Butte with 6 to 8 couples. We had rented a very large condo located right beside the slopes and had several bedrooms so that we could all stay as a group. This same condo had been rented for a couple of years in a row. Leaving Dallas, we drove straight through the next year with ice and snow on the roads. Arriving in the early morning, we unloaded at the condo, dressed in our ski gear, and headed for the slopes. You didn't want to waste a day just sitting around when you could be out in the snow. Meeting back in the condo that afternoon, the group decided to have a soak in the hot tub located in the basement. With wine and towels the guys and girls headed down to the tub. It was a large group and most had not brought their bathing suits, and most were too modest to go without, so we were clad in BVDs, panties, and bras. Correction, the men were in their BVDs only. After several bottles of wine while in the hot tub, the fatigued, one by one, retired to upstairs. Soon, it was Randy and I left steaming in the tub. While discussing the habits of the Finns and Swedes, we decided to finish off the wine with a quick steam in the sauna. It should be noted here that Randy and I had done all the driving the previous night and had the most reason to be dead tired. So here we go to the sauna after ingesting several glasses of wine and raising our body temperature in the hot tub. So, it came to be that while in the sauna and continuing discussions about the habits of the Finns, the next thing was to finish off with a dash to the snow. I dared him, and he dared me, and we both leapt from the sauna, ran up one flight of stairs from the basement to the ground floor, out into the parking lot, and Randy leaped into the giant snow bank. I pulled up short and started yelling, "Sucker," as the steam rose from our hot, wet bodies into the frigid air. He started throwing snow at me and I made for the stairway up to the second floor while laughing hysterically and gasping for breath. After running up 3 flights of stairs, running through the parking lot, and yelling in our half-drunk, fatigued hysteria, I burst through the condo door and rushed over in front of the blazing fireplace. As I turned my wet butt to the flames, still laughing and gasping for breath, before me stood a strange woman in panties and bra that I did not recognize. Randy then rushed through the open door. So, there we stood, Randy and I in our wet revealing BVDs and a strange woman in her panties and bra. Whoops, we must be in the wrong condo. At that moment we realized that this was our old room, but this year they had moved up to the identical condo the next floor up. Again, we rushed up the stairs, burst through the door, and fell onto the floor in a fit of gasping for breath that more resembled a seizure than laughter. It was more than 10 minutes before we could relate our visit to the downstairs neighbors. As a footnote to the story, it was a couple of years later that one of our friends said that they had overheard a woman telling her story about the crazy men that had burst into her condo in their underwear. Cross-country ski trip to the hot springs. Randy Cochran and I had discovered the pleasure of cross-country skis rather than the required cost of lift tickets. He had discovered a map showing hot springs in the backcountry of Colorado just north of Pagosa Springs. The map showed a trail from the highway winding into the wilderness and told of backpackers bathing in the springs, a la natural. We visualized ourselves steaming in the hot water surrounded by trees draped in snow in a winter wonderland. We drove his old Volkswagen bus all night to the trailhead located just a few hundred yards from a rustic motel located on the highway. That bus was quite a sight. It was completely covered with a painted American flag in true hippie style. Strapping on our skis and backpacks, we headed out about mid-morning for what we thought would be a 3-hour trip to the springs. Almost immediately we were joined by a huge white dog that must have called the nearby motel his home. At first, White Dog ran in front, breaking the way through the foot-deep snow. It was fun to watch him sniffing at the snow, apparently smelling out mice or chipmunks. White Dog would sniff around, and then pounce in the air and land head first in the snow thinking he had a prize. White Dog became a nuisance, however, when he decided it was great fun to lag behind then dash between our legs as we were struggling to ski over the uneven ground. He was very large and earned a few curse words as he created several stumbles into the snow of the trail. There was quite a lot of snow when we started, and it continued to snow heavily as the morning turned to afternoon. We bore on, expecting to find the nirvana of hot springs around each snow bank. After a break we realized the light was dimming and examined our watches, discovered it was after 5, and we had been on the trail for more than 7 hours. Suddenly, it seems, dark was all around us as we reluctantly turned around to return in failure to the Volkswagen. Just as suddenly as it had turned dark, we realized how tired we were from the day's ski hiking through the forest. We had not expected to be out at night, and had no headlamps. In the reflected starlight and through the falling snow you could see the ground as a white blanket but no detail of trail or tracks of our skis. White Dog had disappeared, just as had our energy and the trail. What if we got lost in the wintry wilderness with no food or shelter? As we slogged along blindly through the faint white, these thoughts ran through our head. Which direction, which branching of trail, death by exposure? We pushed on, definitely lost, but following our nose through the dark and snow. Suddenly, bam, right between my legs burst White Dog and then through Randy's and he took the lead, like the lead dog in an Alaskan dog sled. Following the bounding white blob in the darkness we continued on through the night putting our trust in the animal's instincts, as we were totally lost. Arriving back at the Volkswagen at 1 a.m. were two frozen, dog-tired, cross-country skiers who vowed to never go out without headlamps, matches, and proper clothing, and perhaps a white dog. Men's trips. Somewhere during my early married years, the idea of taking a men's-only trip came to several of us guys. The first of these trips utilized the executive motorhome which we had purchased through the store. We would drive straight through the night to near Lake City, Colorado, then set up camp and motorcycle and fish from our campground. The drive to Colorado was filled with tall tales, snacking, snoozing, and farting. Bob Poe was infamous for eating onion sandwiches and his sweetened red beans. Most of these trips included a stop for breakfast in Creed and to purchase fishing and motorcycle licenses. Several of these trips saw us camping in the Deer Lakes campground atop Slumgullion Pass, just outside Lake City. On lazy days we could fish the Deer Lakes themselves, but our favorite, and we think the best in Colorado, was the beaver ponds along Brush Creek. This particular area brings back a flush of small memories. Remember, the afternoon I spent sitting on the branch-strewn beaver dam on Brush Creek watching two beavers work and play. They were completely oblivious to our presence and would swim within 10 feet while going about their work of repairing the small leaks in the dam. After that afternoon I always felt a little guilty when walking across the mud dams while trout fishing. The water is usually right to the top and when you walk across the dam it creates little cascades of water over the top at each footstep. Hours of diligent work are required by the beaver to repair my shortcut to the other side of the pond. Remember, the giant trout we caught in the isolated pond within water entering or leaving. Isolated in the pond, he was the lone survivor, the largest who had eaten the rest of his kind. Remember, the trout, when cleaned, gave forth a very large rat. He was so recently swallowed that he looked fresh enough to jump up and run away. Remember, the conversation high above timberline on the ridge overlooking Lake City with the weathered sheepherder. The chill that ran up our spine when he told us of the bear that had eluded him for the last several months, killing his sheep and raiding his tent in the night. We had kidded about bears and part of the men's trip ritual was to bear each other at the most unexpected times. This encounter with the sheep herder was punctuated the next night with the sound of 2 rifle shots just after dark. This same men's campsite had been used by our family several summers before and was the campfire site where the famous booger story was told by Mr. Poe to the children. The storyline was of a kid who picked his nose and threw the booger on the ground. It grew and started to slide and slip around, engulfing unsuspecting children in the dark. While returning from fishing at Brush Creek all afternoon we were crossing the Deer Lakes Dam on our motorcycles when suddenly a game warden stepped from the bushes into our path. There was no escape, There we sat on our bikes with fishing vests bulging and squirming with the mass of rainbow and brook trout gathered that day. We had not been overly worried about the limit on trout, we had never been questioned, until now. First, he told us we shouldn't ride our bikes across the dam. It was not illegal but might disturb the local campers near the dam. Next, he asked if we had been fishing. Then he asked if we had caught anything. The answers were all too obvious. We were caught and very large fines were pending. Then the magic question, he asked where we were camped. We told him just up the road in the second campsite on the right. He said, "Okay boys, let's go up to your campsite and look at your fish." Faster than you could say, fish, we had hit the kick-starters, roared across the parking lot in a trail of dust, accelerated up the steep camp road and slid into camp with dust and trout flying everywhere. The surprised game warden was still starting his pickup while we were feeding trout to the surrounding woods of the campsite. Bob Poe had stayed at the motor home that afternoon, and upon hearing the roar of motorcycles he looked out to see us throwing trout in all directions and laughing so hard we could not explain our circumstance. The slow-witted warden had been left standing in a cloud of dust. He had asked us to go to our campground and we had gone, leaving him standing there fumbling for the keys to his pickup. We were trying to explain to Bob, trying to stop laughing, and trying to count and ascertain the number of trout that were legal to possess all at the same time. Just about that moment, the pickup roared up the hill and slid to a stop beside the executive. Unwilling to admit to himself that he had been outwitted by the city boys, he calmly strolled into camp and went about counting and classifying each of the trout as we presented them to him. We each had exactly the limit and all were the correct size, etc. Late that night, we had a great fish fry consuming large numbers of rainbow trout gathered from underneath the pine and aspen. Brush Creek was also the site for Dad's camping trip. Brian Atwood, his dad, myself, and Dad decided to do a Colorado trip. We spent the first 3 days fishing Brush Creek's ponds. Brian and I shuttled most of the supplies up the trail on our cycles while the dads hiked and fished their way about 3 miles up from the gravel road. They were both about 65 at this time and we were amazed at how fast they made the uphill hike. Dad said it was the first time he had slept on the ground since he left Germany. He had sworn that he would never camp out again after wintering 2 seasons in the Alps and living on deer and K rations. They really enjoyed making coffee in a cooking pot and Mr. Atwood loved the excuse to add some whiskey to his coffee. It was the only time I can remember camping with my father. Brushy Creek yielded its regular bounty of trout. We hiked out, and continued the trip with jeeps and motels. The altitude at Deer Lake's campground is about 10,000 feet and it gets very cold even in the summer. On another of the men's trips, after dark, we were forced into the motor home by the cold. While playing poker, someone asked what kind of liquor we had. 1 quart of vodka and no Cokes or 7-Up was it. After rustling around, someone found a can of instant breakfast drink Tang. That was the origin of the first Poontang mixed drink. Randy Cochran seemed to always want to be the leader of the exploration part of motorcycle riding. Bob Poe liked to cook the fish and breakfast, but it takes 3 people just to clean up after him. Ray Wren liked to ride bikes and fish, but did neither one very well. He enjoyed himself though, and we enjoyed him. Bud Johnson is a really nice guy, but I could never tell if he was really enjoying himself. Steve Dozier, my cousin, really enjoyed the one trip he was on, but his wife put an end to any further forays. Brian Atwood, too bad he and Bob had the split over the trout and mother incident. In later years the format of the trip changed from basing at the motor home each night, to a traveling bike and camp-out format. We saw different areas from the previous years, but the fishing was never as good as at Deer Lakes. Memories from these trips seem to relate to places such as Imogene Pass, Tomboy Mine, Silverton, Ouray, Engineer Pass, Telluride, and on and on.